Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, glad to have you here today, because you have to be by law, so that's good. You're not going to get arrested. Our topic today that you're going to take notes on, equivalent fractions and common denominators. Now before we move on to adding and subtracting fractions, we have to be able to find common denominators, because you cannot add fractions together unless they have the same denominator. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go over 3 problems where I take 2 fractions and we find the least common denominator, and then we change those to equivalent fractions without changing the value. Then you'll have a chance to practice on your own. Then when you're done with that, you'll have a chance to work on any work you need to work on in my class. So the first, and I did this in my first class, and I used 3 different fractions. So if you want to watch that to help jog your memory. The first one we are going to do is we have the 2 fractions, 2/3 and 1/2. Our instructions are going to be, first, find the least common denominator. First thing we're going to do is find the least common denominator, which is the same thing as finding the least common multiple. However, you just find the least common multiples of the denominators. So let's ask Natalie, what are my denominators?
3 and 2.
3 and 2. So my denominators are 3 and 2. Now I'm going to find the least common multiple of those 2 denominators. You've done notes on least common multiple before. Hopefully you're writing this stuff down so that when you have to do this assignment, you'll be able to refer back to these notes and not say, this doesn't make any sense. I don't even understand how to do it. It's just crazy. I mean, you told us to do this, but you never taught it. So we're going to find our least common denominator. We're going to make a mini multiplication chart. And we're going to list those multiples of each of our denominators until we find the first one that shows up in both lists. Now, something I will say, you're going to get to a point where you can probably figure them out in your head. And also, you have the ability to use a multiplication chart when finding these least common denominators. I don't necessarily have to write all this out. I can just bust out my handy-dandy multiplication chart, look at my row for 2, my row for 3, and go, boom! There's the same one in both rows. That's the first one. That is my least common denominator. But for the purpose of teaching you how to do this, I'll just list a couple. Sometimes I might need to go out a little ways, quite a ways. Sometimes it's very easy and happens early in here. We go 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Natalie, what is my least common denominator?
6.
6. So if you had a question and all it asked is to find the least common denominator, then we'd be done. However, some of the questions you're going to get are, say, find equivalent fractions with that least common denominator. So I am going to change both of these into fractions that have a denominator of 6, because I've decided that is my least common denominator. Now this comes in very handy and mandatory when adding and subtracting fractions. Can't do it without doing that. Plain and simple. Now, Matthew, let me ask you a question. What is 7 times 1? 7. Paul, 38 times 1.
38.
Zen, 470 times 1.
470.
Alexis, 9,286 times 1. 9,286. Good. So, is there anybody that disagrees with me that if you multiply a number by 1, the value stays the same, right? Okay. We're good on that? Okay. Let me ask this then. Silas, how do I write a fraction that equals 1?
1.
Okay. What does a fraction that equals 1 look like, Ashley?
6/6.
6/6. Give me another one, Peyton.
5/5.
5/5. Tatum?
3/3.
3/3. Aiden?
10 tenths.
10/10. Riley?
800.
800 800ths. All right. So let me ask you this. Daniel, what do all those fractions that they were telling me have in common?
They all equal 1.
Okay, and how do you know it equals 1? Just because they said it?
Because the numerator is equal to the denominator.
Good. If the numerator and denominator are the same, your fraction equals 1. So, for example, I have 1/3, 2/3, 3/3, and that equals 1. If I have 5/5, that is going to equal 1. Because if we look at all these, 2 halves equals 1, 4/4, 5/5, 6/6. Those all equal 1. So anytime you have a numerator and denominator that are the same, that fraction equals 1. And we already decided also that if you multiply something by 1, we're not changing the value. Correct? So we need to multiply each of these fractions by another fraction that equals 1. So we don't change the value, we're changing how it's written. We don't want to change the value, we want to change how it's written. So Phoenix,
Yes.
I want to change this 3 to a denominator of 6. So what would I multiply the 3 by?
2.
2. But I need this fraction to equal 1. So I have to make that 2 over 2. So Phoenix, 2 times 2 is 4. Okay, now what I'm saying here, and what Phoenix helped me get, is 2/3 equals 4/6. Well, here's 2/3, Phoenix. Let's check how smart we are to see if 2/3 does indeed equal 4/6. 1/3, or 1/6, 2/6, 3/6, 4/6. It works.
Yay!
Same value. We multiplied by 1. So we didn't change the value, we're changing how it looks. If I said, Chase, you have an hour detention, but Ashley, you have 60 minutes detention.
No.
Same value, we're just changing how it's written.
What did I do?
All right. All right, now we have 1/2. And we need to change that to something over 6. So Riley, 2 times what is going to give me 6? 3 times 3. And since I want to multiply by a fraction that equals 1, my numerator also has to be 3. So Riley, 1 times 3 is 3. So now, according to Riley and me, 1/2 equals 3/6. Boom shakalaka, it works perfectly. Okay? So, some of what you'll do today will say, find the least common denominator. And all you'd have to do is say the least common denominator is 6. Some of what you'll have to do today, it'll say find the least common denominator and make equivalent fractions using that common denominator. So this would be how this is done. You have fraction pieces, You could use them to check if you wanted to.
Wow.
If you wanted to. Okay, so that's one example here. Let's look at other examples. I have a total of 3 examples for each class, so I think the next one is going to be example number 2. So we have the 3/4 and 3/8. 97 and 0.2% of you probably could tell me what the least common denominator is. However, I'm going to go through the steps for that 2 and 0.8% that don't get it, so that we see every step. So first step, I need to find my least common denominator. I take my 2 denominators, which are what, Erica?
4 and 8.
4 and 8. I look at my multiplication chart, and I can look at the multiples of 4 and the multiples of 8. Or if I'm too lazy to turn back to the multiplication chart, I can do all this work here and keep going for as long as I need to. Oh, boom. Erica, what is the least common denominator? 8. So I found the least common denominator. So if the problem asks, find the least common denominator, you got it. If it asks, find the least common denominator and then equivalent fractions, we have one more step. We need these 2 fractions to equal something that has a denominator of 8 where I do not change the value. In order to do that, everybody in here agrees, or you're just trying to be silly, that if you multiply something by 1, God bless you, Matthew, if you multiply something by 1, you don't change the value. So Chase, 4 times what equals 8?
2.
4 times 2. So 3 times 2 equals what, Chase? 6. So now what Chase and I came up with was 3/4. So we started with 3/4 equals 6/8. Let's see. I'm so excited to find out if we're right, Chase. I can hardly stand it. It's like Christmas morning, Chase.
Except it's November.
I said it's like Christmas. Boom! It works! 3/4 does equal 6/8. Oh, that was so awesome. It's like getting a new bicycle Christmas morning. Now, do we need to change, Paul? Do we need to change 3/8?
No.
No, it's already over 8, right? Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul. So, if the problem said find the least common denominator, we found it, it's 8. If it said find the least common denominator and equivalent fractions, we've done that right here. Let's do one more. Because I promised you we'd do 3, so that those people in my first class can go, I didn't quite understand it. Let me watch a video of another class. Somebody in my first class might say, this doesn't make any sense. Because I have somebody in my first class who says that no matter what. Please put your name. This doesn't make any sense. Put my name on my paper. What is that? I don't even know what paper means. How am I supposed to know my name? I couldn't even talk when I was born. Doesn't make any sense. How would I know my name? All right, we have 11/12 and 1/6. 11/12 and 1/6. First, we need to find the least common denominator. Zoe, what do you think the least common denominator is going to be? Oh, she's busting out the multiplication chart. Look at that. Boom. She doesn't want to have all that writing. She's got it.
It is at 12.
It is 12. It is 12. If you know your multiplication facts, this becomes easier and easier. The more we do it, especially as we get into adding and subtracting fractions, it becomes easier and easier and easier and easier and easier and easier and another easier.
Whoa.
So if the problem says find the least common denominator, boom, we got it. If the problem says find the least common denominator and equivalent fractions using that denominator, I need to change 11/12 to something over 12 that's equal. I need to change 1/6 into something over 12 without changing the value. And Peyton, you said done when I wrote this down? You did. How do you know it's done?
I'm talking about that.
Okay, but how do you know it's done? Because it already has a denominator of 12, and that's what I need it to have. So I don't even need to mess with that one. Good job. Now, this one does not have a denominator of 12, so I must multiply by a fraction that equals 1. Eric, any idea what fraction we should use that equals 1? That is the worst one I've ever written.
It likes to petrify.
Yeah. Say again?
1.
So what should my fraction be?
1.
1 over 1? So 6 times what is 12? 2 over 2. Good. So then what is my numerator? 2. Isabel, will you get that? It's probably for you anyway. Okay? So least common denominator 12. 11/12 equals 11/12. 1/6 equals 2/12. So there we go. Need to speak to me? Boom, shakalaka, peace out. God bless, love you. Do something kind today. If you haven't subscribed, do it right now because I told you to. And I am the boss of the world.